If you've ever thought of quilting your own projects but just don't know where to start, I have the perfect first steps for you. I've put together a PDF guide. I call it 3 Steps Toward Freehand Freedom. These are the baby steps, but they can help you move past your overwhelm and show you that yes, indeed, freehand quilting can be learned. So if you'd like to snag this PDF, there's a link in the show notes, or if you're an Instagram user, just message me 3 steps. That's the number 3 STEPS, and I'll send you that link. Let today be the day you get started.
I am a huge believer in the growth mindset. When you're talking about building a business, being a quilter who wants to try a lot of different techniques, we're not born knowing how to do this stuff, and we can learn from other people, other resources, experiment, take what you like and apply it in new ways.
Welcome to Measure Twice, Cut Once, the podcast where we hear quilters and other crafters' stories and draw encouragement and even life lessons from them. Today I've invited Jess Zeigler into my studio, and she's going to talk with us about her metamorphosis from hobby quilter to family supporting business, so stay tuned for that. I am your host, Susan Smith, and I'm coming to you from my quilting studio, Stitched by Susan. This is where my Longarm Lucy and I spend lots of hours doing freehand, edge-to-edge quilting. So if you're not a quilter and those terms aren't meaningful to you, it's basically doodling on the surface of a quilt with a 50-pound writing implement with needle and thread attached and at high speed. If you are a machine quilter, I invite you to tune in to the live and unscripted events hosted on my YouTube channel, also called Stitched by Susan. These are streamed live, and so they're interactive, so you're able to ask questions about the project that I'm working on and get answers in real time while I'm actually stitching it out. So if you'd like to be notified of upcoming events, be sure to sign up for my newsletter at my website, stitchedbysusan.com. Another thing that I've recently made available to machine quilters is a mini course on the all-over feather. So this is kind of an informal style of feather, and it's literally stitched across an entire quilt top quite casually. And so in this free course, I'll show you how to walk through the steps from the basic individual feather shape through even coverage on the quilt, talks about avoiding awkward corners, customizing little details to suit you. So it's all within this little mini course, and I'll walk you through it and demo the quilting for you, step by baby step. So to sign up for that, simply head to my website and a sign-up form will pop up. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. Today's Pins and Needles is brought to you by The Will and Dave Show.
Hi, I'm the Will half of The Will and Dave Show, a short little podcast that myself and the eponymous Dave like to record talking about the things that really matter to us, whether that's social, political, or pop culture. Usually we don't see eye to eye, but more often than not, we can find some common ground in there somewhere. And now, back to Pins and Needles, with a quick tip for all you sharp quilters out there.
Since we'll be talking with a Longarm quilter today, I thought I would share with you a tip for those quilters among you. A lot of us supply, particularly if we have quilting as a business, but maybe even just if we make a lot of our own quilts, we supply or keep on hand rolls of batting, sometimes in different, thicknesses or weights or sizes, or even sometimes colors, black versus natural versus bleached. And it's really advantageous to have those battings on hand, but of course they're bulky. How in the world do you store them and have them not kind of take over your room? Well, my solution to this was actually my husband's solution, let's be honest, was to create a hanging system. And he simply got the hangers that you would use in closets that hold a bar across them, so they're kind of triangular in shape. And he hung these in pairs, and of course they have to be on studs because they have to hold some weight. So he put pairs of these hangers, and I have 4, one right above the other, on one wall of a room. I could fit 4 rolls of batting. So the hangers are installed. We had our hardware store cut a simple metal rod that spanned the hangers, and my husband drilled holes through the ends of those rods so that we could put a wing nut and screw through rod and hanger. So that keeps the rods firmly in place. So all you have to do is unattach that rod, slide your roll of batting on, and then wing nut that securely back in place. And now your roll of batting hangs and it spins freely, and you can just pull out as much as you need. My contribution to this whole project was I happen to have my batting in a room that has a concrete floor, so this might not work as well on carpet, but if you have some kind of solid surface, I just took a wide, like a 2-inch strip of painter's tape and stretched it out along the floor and put markings on it in 2-inch increments. And so that serves as my measuring guide. I just pull out the batting and I can see how long it is, and I can just use I use a cardboard batting roller rod from inside it as my ruler, stretch that across and just cut it to size. So presto, my batting is up, out of the dust, out of the way. 4 rolls are stored on one wall. It's genius. Thanks, husband. You know that I love my coffee. If you are interested in supporting this podcast, an easy way to do it is go to buymeacoffee.com/Stitched by Susan. There, for the price of one delicious coffee, you're able to make a one-time contribution. I so much appreciate your support. It helps us to keep investing in better and better equipment to produce these podcasts for you. So maybe take a second now to refill your cup as you settle back to enjoy today's interview. Today's guest is Jess Zeigler. And Jess is going to be opening up about her journey from machine quilting as a hobby through growing and developing a business that she and her husband both operate now that trains and supports quilters across the nation and even around the world. You won't want to miss this. Well, Jess, welcome into the studio this morning. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Great. What got you started in quilting?
Yeah, I feel like it's a very common story. I had my first child and quit my corporate job, and I had a lot of time on my hands, and I've always loved quilts for the feel of them. They're not too hot, not too cold. I love the artistry that went into quilt tops, or that goes into quilt tops. My grandma she didn't sew quilts herself, but she collected quilts. Her mother was a quilter. She was the quilter in our family. So I just feel like I was always around quilts. And my sister had the opportunity to take a quilting class, like Quilting 101 in high school,
right,
which I love about our small town. So she's a few years younger than us, and we got married pretty young. But even so, she, as a probably not even 20-year-old, made us a quilt for our wedding. And I was like, oh man, if she can do it, I can do this. And so after my first was born and I found myself just having more time at home, I was very interested in quilting. My sister, in her quilting class, they learned from Eleanor Burns' log cabin book, where you just rip the strips and you're throwing fabric around. And it just felt fun and freeing. And so she also she's been the artist in our family. I'll always, think of her as the artist in the family, and always having a good sense of color and design. And she helped me pick out my first fabrics for a quilt. And so she was kind of the one that took my hand and got me started into the piecing part of it. And after a quilt had been pieced, I was totally lost. I had no idea what steps came next. I looked at the back and all the raw seams. I was like, okay, now what? I really have no idea what comes next. All that, I had never thought through the steps or the process before. So that was all totally new. And turned my first quilt like a pillowcase, and
many do.
It. Yep. And from there, I just became more interested in like, okay, why do these quilts look this way? And, these other ones look different, like with the stitches hand quilting, the non-tied or non-turned quilts. I just really started paying attention and became so curious about quilting. I would check books out from the library. It was even like, I'm sure there were some quilting blogs, but it was just like, they weren't as popular as now. I mean, you can log on now and get all sorts of resources, but I just had a very pure, genuine curiosity about quilting. And I soon became in love with the quilting part. So I eventually tried to piece something very quickly just so I could get to the quilting part on my domestic machine.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of where the love of quilting started with me on my
I love that you're
domestic
kind of
machine.
exploring that process of finding out, like, really. Well, let me say it differently. I grew up in a family that made quilts, my mother, my grandmother, my great grandmother, etc. So I never had curiosity about how it came together. I sort of was born knowing about the layers of a quilt and the batting and how it was assembled. So I love that you showed that how unfamiliar that was to you and how there are multi skills in making a quilt, right? It's not just a one-step process. Making the top is just step number one. Okay,
Absolutely.
carry on with the story.
Well, and what you just said reminded me, even when I would get books and try to like get the materials and do it, I found there was so much more involved, like getting the right materials to use. So for instance, you know, put down a layer of batting on the back or whatever. So that can mean very different things if you're talking about a high loft poly bat and then trying to quilt using that, or a very lower profile cotton that kind of adheres and keeps your sandwich really nice. So even like, I guess what I'm getting to is the materials that go into it often make a big difference as well.
That's true.
So not only the techniques, but also like knowing what to use to kind of set yourself up for success, because there are so many options out there which are a good thing, but knowing what is going to help you get the best results is a totally different thing. So I found going to in-person class to learn about the actual quilting on a domestic was so eye-opening. You know, I'd done all my own research, but get into a room with a quilter who had done it before and was really good at it. That was just mind-blowing to me.
And I think being able to see and handle those different types of battings, or even cotton versus, maybe linen fabrics, all those things make such a difference in the finished result of your quilt. And there's just nothing, YouTube cannot make up for the value of feeling and handling them and knowing what they wash up like and all that, all those sorts of
100%.
factors.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I first got to know you, in air quotes, on social media with your no Y seam patterns that you have published. And you're a feather girl. Tell us more about your feathers.
Feathers in all varieties.
Even chickens?
Okay, maybe not in the quilting world.
Oh, okay.
I really love the feathered star. It was a challenging block, but also just so visually impactful that I was like, okay, I'll do all the steps. I'll do whatever it takes so I can get this finished result. So that was, I think, just playing on EQ software, finding a block that was something that I wanted to replicate in my own sewing, but then just not being able to get a consistent Y seam led me into the direction of, okay, what if we just kind of break this apart, add some seams in just so it'll be easy sewing. What can we accomplish, or can I get more consistent results doing it this way, even though we're adding in a new step for foundation paper piecing?
Right. So maybe let's take just a second, because lots of our listeners aren't necessarily quilt makers. So can you, in a sentence or two, describe what a Y seam is and why we try to avoid it so much?
Well, so it's not just a straight through seam. You have to stop and reposition the fabric. And often it's using bias, which is more stretchy. And I think that is part of the process that is a little bit more tricky to duplicate the same way for every seam. So if you have, so you're sewing to a point, stopping, repositioning, and then meeting it so it goes into a Y shape. Boy, I haven't thought about that for a while. But yeah, it was, I found that, well, it took struggling through my first feathered star the traditional way, and just being frustrated with the results, having a huge big bubble in the middle and just not understanding, because at that point I had had quilted for several years and I thought I knew what I was doing. And I'm sure there were more, with more practice, I think I could have gotten better at it. But I really like the idea of kind of applying the chain piecing sort of aspect where you're going to make X number of these units and you're just going to go, 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 go. And you don't have to stop to do the Y seaming. That was appealing to me to kind of like systematize how that block went together. So I found a way with the EQ software to insert a few more seams into a block, but I was just really excited about having consistent results in those areas where a Y seam would have been or is appropriate. It was just kind of a workaround, and other people were interested in that too. And so that was kind of how my I would say my first popular pattern was born. And that was at a time where I really wanted to pursue pattern design and pattern writing as part of a business. And that I played around with that for a while, and I just didn't feel like it took off for me. And I found myself being continually pulled to the quilting side instead of the piecing side. I have to call piecers and quilters, even though we're all quilters. But sometimes, when you're talking about the two different things,
it is two entirely different skill sets.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And some people love doing it all and some don't necessarily. So.
Right. And I don't know, piecers isn't an offensive term, hopefully. It's just my way to distinguish.
Not at all.
We're not talking about the layering and the quilting of the layers. We're talking about sewing the patchwork together.
Right. So I have another personal question that I wanted to ask you. I was reading down through your personal little tidbits that you have on your website, which I absolutely love. It gives us just such a feel for who you are. But one, of course, caught my eye, and that is that you love movie quotes. And and I thought, she is my people for sure. When we had 4 teenagers at home at one point, and we used to have entire meals where all you could do was talk in movie quotes. And I have to say, I'm very bad at it. So that was the only time of the day I was ever silent. But anyway, it was great fun.
It's so funny. Yeah, I feel like that came about from we never had cable growing up. And so we had the same VCR movies that we would watch over and over and over again. And we were fluent within our family unit of family quotes. And still to this day, I find myself, the older I get, I don't evolve in my movie quotes. They stay pretty much from that time in my life, maybe 20 years ago or something. But yeah, there's certainly movies that got wore out.
Yes. Ask me any line in Princess Bride. I'm all over that.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's a classic.
It is. And you also had a stint of, in the newspaper world, it's having a byline. What is it in podcasting? You had a feature in a podcast. When about that was that? After your feathers, when you were already into machine quilting?
Yes. Gosh, I'm trying to piece that together. Oh, no, I was fully quilting for other people.
Okay.
So after I don't want to say gave up on the dream of pattern design, I felt myself being pulled back to quilting, like I mentioned. And as a mom of kids who were in school but had some special needs that we would frequently have to kind of manage with appointments and all that kind of thing, I felt it important to have a home-based business where I could kind of be in charge of my own schedule. And the way that it made the most sense to me was to quilt for other people out of my home and being able to provide. When I started, I did all free motion quilting for other people because I didn't have my computer yet. And then later on, I added the computer. And so I was definitely in the business of quilting for others when I was asked to do a podcast for American Patchwork and Quilting's podcast. And also at that time, in the background and kind of on the side, I was doing some work for their scrap lab, for Quilts and More's scrap lab. And I had maybe 1 or 2 other patterns in their quilt magazines at that time. So I had worked with the editors back and forth, and I live fairly close to where the magazines are published or where they do all the editorial work. And so they asked me about doing a podcast with them. And at the time I was like, Well, it was just not on my radar at all. And I thought, well, this would be fun. And I'm so like, I just don't feel prepared for this. But then I thought, like, okay, this is an opportunity to do something a little bit scary, and like, we'll just jump in and see where it leads. So I did a very short 6-month contract. At that same time, I was getting very busy in my quilting work too, just having a lot of customer quilts waiting for time on my machine. And the podcast helped me to kind of picture myself and my business at more of a national level. So it's kind of an like, oh, somebody wants to hear from me, or so, I don't know. There was something about being asked and going for it and being able to connect with other people in the industry that gave me the confidence, really. I mean, if I'm being honest, to say, okay, well, what happens? Like, let's follow this through to a logical conclusion. If I do this podcasting a long time, I still want to do quilting in some capacity. What happens if I get, a larger profile or something, and more people want me to quilt for them? I'm still fairly limited on the amount of quilts that I can get through.
There's only so many hours in the day, right?
Yeah. And at this time, it started as I just kind of paused because I think like this could go in so many different directions. But when I started, I had the very privileged position of not having to make a lot of money from quilting. My husband had a full-time job. We had benefits. It was something that I could do on the side to make enough money for our family. But then the more I got into business, the more I saw it as a challenge, and the more I wanted to grow. And I think like business podcasts and resources that are, through audiobooks, podcasts, just books, just being in social media, you can kind of see what other business owners are doing.
Right.
I started becoming more interested in that. And then it was kind of like a challenge to see how I could maybe uniquely grow and scale my skill set, the things that I was naturally interested in and curious about, and the things I was learning, whether anybody was paying me or not, and the things that I just wanted to talk about all the time. It was kind of a challenge to say like, well, what happens if, and I had to be real with myself and say, at tops, I would only want to quilt maybe one quilt a day through my computerized, that was very doable with my computer edge to edge type of work. And I didn't really want to I didn't want to get any bigger I didn't want to add a second machine. I didn't want to, at that point in time, you're just like, you can scale your prices, but I couldn't really scale the number of people I worked with. And so that was kind of the origins of like, how the, like all the questions of like, where could this go? And what do I want to do? And really self-reflective work of, how can I help other people and do this thing that I love to do? And that was the foundations of, I felt like the podcast was a springboard to put myself in a position where I was thinking about scaling and where to go. And that's really how the Longarm League started around that time. I'm trying to think I think it was overlapping at the very beginning.
Okay.
The podcast contract and the beginnings of the Longarm League.
So where I got to know you better was I entered fairly early on in the Longarm League. For sure, you were on my horizon, and I saw what you were doing in building that. So maybe give our listeners, because lots of them are quilters, just a brief picture of what the Longarm League is and who it's intended to serve.
Okay. Yeah, great. We are a collective of quilters. We're primarily quilting for other people in business. We're business owners mostly. And most of us are doing digital edge-to-edge quilting, but not all. And so when it started, it was like, okay, how can we just share information, help each other out, like have the conversations that I wasn't a part of anywhere else. And I realized there's probably lots of Facebook groups that I know nothing about, or, there's probably other avenues and areas where quilters were congregating, but Instagram was a primary social media outlet for me. And at the time I was connecting with a lot of other quilters, and I would ask other people like, oh, how are you doing this? And I got lots of questions myself in my direct messages. And I thought, like, how could we more formalize kind of a relationship where we're helping each other, we're sharing techniques, the way we do business. I mean, I had some mentors in real life that, for an afternoon would say like, okay, this is how, in very general terms, how I do, like how customers come to me, how we fill out the intake form. It was very quick and very broad, and they're business owners, right? So you feel a little bit like, I don't want to come to your home and shadow you for a week to get the nitty gritty on like every single thing that you're doing. There's so many things that you need to figure out, not only with your machine. Some people are coming into it, they don't even have a Longarm machine. They've ordered one, or one's on the way. So they're getting used to their machine. If they have robotics, that's a different ball game. It doesn't, all the business side of this can be brand new too. So it is a lot of things to learn at once. At the same time, you kind of have to get all of those ducks in a row before you feel confident enough to be taking other people's quilts and really making it into a business. And so it was really out of the desire to formalize some sort of I don't want to even say mentorship, but just like a collective group of quilters who were sharing information with each other.
And speaking from my experience, it's been really, really great because you referenced Facebook groups, which certainly are out there, but they can be large and they can be so broad, that it's hard to find people in it that are actually kind of at a similar place to where you are. So your league provides then a smaller atmosphere where everyone's kind of trying to learn the same thing, right? How to set up a business, how to serve customers well, and of course, how to actually operate their Longarm machines. But you've just got this smaller, more intimate connection with other people doing the same thing.
Yeah. Yep. When we started, the people who joined me at the beginning, they were already long-arming for other people. And so it became difficult. We saw a real need for people who were interested in joining or starting their own businesses. They came in and they were talking to people who had already been there and done that sort of a thing. And so just within the last year, we developed a getting started program for people who are just beginning to long-arm quilt for others. And we called that rookie season, which is now, it's kind of morphed and evolved over this last year based on what, we're just trying to really listen to what people are wanting and to provide what they're needing. But for the first time this year, I'm really happy that we did it this way, that we have, getting started steps, and somebody who's brand new to it can come in from the beginning and be, have the information broke down week by week, what you should be thinking about now. Here's how to order things. Here's how to work with a potential client. Here's, how to realign your digital designs. Here's how to do the book work and to think about how to pay yourself and how to set money aside for expenses and taxes and all that kind of thing. So there's, it's now, I'm glad that we have a clear path for the very new beginners coming in. And so we're doing...
Yeah. Honestly, I'll just interject here, Jess, just a plug for you, because I started my quilting business, on my own, and I had been an entrepreneur before. So I had some sense of that, but you can't overstate the value of just having your hand held and being walked through these steps, like the money it saves you, but the time it saves you. I'm talking months and years, right, of learning these things, trial and error. And you have distilled it down into this very concrete, one step at a time process. And I just can't overstate the value of that for a new business owner coming into the quilting world. It's great.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for saying that. Yeah. It's fun to be able to see. There's a lot of confidence issues too that come with this, and to be going through the class at the same time as other entrepreneurs is really valuable too. You'll see that, a lot of us have the same kind of fears, like, what if I mess up this quilt? Okay, what if this happens? And to know that you have other people who have either been in a situation or a similar situation that can lead you through that is really valuable. And I feel like it gives people who might even be very good at their machines and very, knowledgeable, maybe they've quilted for themselves for a really long time, to just, say, yes, you can do this. And we're here if anything goes off the rails or something, you'll be able to talk about it with people who know exactly what you're saying and the fears that you've had.
And no matter where you are in your journey, things happen. A little while back, I was working on a quilt. Fortunately, it was my own, but I like to quilt with the stitch regulator off. So what that means to the non-quilters is you just push the start button and the needle starts going at a fixed rate, and you move it around, and that controls the stitch length and all of that. So I like quilting that way. So I'm buzzing along through my quilt, and I hit a thick seam allowance, and the needle broke. So then you've got a metal sharp shaft bobbing up and down at X number of 100 stitches per second. And you can imagine what that did. That stitched a big old hole in the quilt, right? So my point just being, things like this happen, and to have other quilters who I guarantee you it's happened to before, that you can ask, what do I do now? And they can help you get through those problems.
Yes, absolutely. Talk you off the ledge in some cases.
That's right. Exactly.
And when we are very up close to a quilt, we're going to see any kind of imperfection that happens. And sometimes our fear is, oh, my customer's going to freak out. They're, whatever. And oftentimes that is not the perception on the other side. They're just so thrilled to see the quilt done in a really beautiful way that, they're just things that it's helpful for like you said, other people who have been there to just give you that advice and comfort, and to be able to settle into what you do best and how to, confidently offer your service to others.
Yes. So you've referred to a term a couple of times, edge-to-edge quilting, which basically means, right, laying the same type of quilting design completely across the quilt. You don't change thread colors, you don't stop for seams or blocks or borders. It's just one edge to another. But within that genre, there is the freehand style, which is what I do, and there's the digital style, which is what you do. But what is it about edge-to-edge coverage that you love on a quilt? I do too, and I know my answer, but I want to hear yours. Why does that appeal more than the detailed custom work that's different in every area or block of the quilt?
Well, I love custom quilting. I can appreciate it because I did that for years. I offered it, and it was, for me, it was more in terms of a business. To be totally transparent, it would take me so long to do custom work that when I wanted to migrate to edge, it was more like, okay, I can do a quilt in a day, where for custom, I mean, I would have a quilt on the frame for 3 or 4 weeks, depending on like what was going on in my life and how involved the quilting stuff was. So I found that when I transitioned to edge, I like the texture that the edge quilting can provide as kind of like a background of what's going on in the piecing. But I feel like over time, when I freehanded designs, I feel like I got to know what worked well in certain spaces. I mean, there was just so much that I learned along the way, but like I can take some of the motifs that I would freehand and kind of translate them into edge-to-edge designs. But I think primarily that the texture is what really appeals to me. And it doesn't have to be, some of my designs are pretty involved and intricate and dense and all the things, but there's something very beautiful about a very simple shape that is repeated, and the texture that provides and the way that it can just complement a quilt top. I think that is what I love most about edge-to-edge quilting, is just the texture.
I agree. You nailed it. It makes it take a supporting role, in my opinion. It's a supporting role then for either the fabric or the design, like the pattern of the quilt, the star or whatever. And so the quilting just becomes this little, best supporting actress. And by the way, if people want to see the types of designs that you develop, just look for threaded quilting, look for Longarm League, hashtag anywhere, and you'll see lots of your digital pantographs, right? Stitched out by various people on their machines. So,
yeah, absolutely. And we have a longarmleague.com is a place. We have a shop within that site that has commercially available, anybody can buy and use them in their digital machines. And I kind of just morphed into that. I started talking about my own designs, but I think again, like just going through the learning process of adding the computer, I learned by stitching out other people's designs, I learned what I really liked about them. And so that was also influential as I started designing digital designs on my own. What I really loved about some patterns and what I thought worked well, in applying them to quilt tops. And I've tried to sort of marry the things I was doing before with the freehand, plus what I liked about other people's digital designs, and have tried to develop patterns and designs of my own that are available, to anybody who has a computer.
Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of hearing a thread running through all your stories, which is that in everything you've done, whether it was a podcast or the freehand quilting or the non-computer or now the digital work, you have found a way to learn from that, whatever that you're doing, and then apply that. And it helps to guide you in what you know and love to do and what you develop. But the point being, we can all learn from whatever thing we're doing now. Like, don't feel like you have to know the end from the beginning. Explore, learn, take it forward with you.
I am a huge believer in like the growth mindset kind of stuff. I mean, when you're talking about building a business, and even if you're not, like being a quilter who wants to try a lot of different techniques, we're not born knowing how to do this stuff. And we can learn from other people, other resources, experiment, take what you like and apply it in new ways. And I think that's been so evident looking back at my life and my quilting life specifically, just how I've taken these tidbits on all these other areas that I've tried and, combine them to do what I'm doing now. And the growth mindset thing has been huge for me. And thanks for picking up on that.
So what does life kind of look like for you now? And I'm leaving the door wide open for you might do something surprising in future. But right now, this is kind of a family business. Am I right?
It is. It is now. My husband left his job he was at a car dealership as a service manager he was there for 16 years. And I have just always had this quilting passion and wasn't ever able to think of a way that it could actually sustain a family. And with the Longarm League and the way it's grown over the last couple of years, we saw more potential for like, okay, what if, because I was thinking about hiring someone anyway. And, with COVID happening, he had more time at home and we were like, oh, okay, we actually really like this. And we always talked about, I imagined ourselves being, empty nesters and traveling and I would teach quilt classes at places and we would drive together and we would, see the country. And with COVID, that timeline sort of, we thought, okay.
What if?
Oh, yes. What if, if we can trust ourselves to figure this out as we go, like what could we do together? And that was a very scary thing. But we started at the beginning of 2021. And so it's, been 10 months of working together and it's been really great. He's learning more and more every day and being able to.
Has he actually quilted a quilt?
Yeah. Oh yeah. When we were thinking about, we were just racking our brains to think like, how can we do this? Because I think we had an end vision in mind and it was we wanted less stressful work for him. We wanted him to be able to see our kids more. We wanted to, I think we started with the vision of what would it feel like to wake up and not have to, drive into his job and tried to like reverse engineer how we could make that work. And at the beginning, I was thinking, okay, I'm still quilting for clients. I am doing the Longarm League thing on the side too. What if I just more did the Longarm League and he, I would help the customers pick out their designs and stuff, but he could actually run the machine. So he took a week off of work. This is over a year ago. And I trained him on how to run my Longarm. And then I'm trying to be tactful about this. It wasn't something that he was as passionate about as I was, and he also wanted to do such a good job. And there's a learning curve and I was right there. I was helping him, but it was after that whole week of doing that, his brain was thinking, okay, if I get really good and efficient at this, how can we feed our family just with, the quilting side? We made a decision to focus all of our time and attention into the league, which is scalable. And we didn't really foresee adding more machines or anything to the actual physical, quilting of the quilts. So in that process, he got to know the terms and know what it's like to try to realign a digital pantograph, how to baste, how to load. We went through the exercise of doing all of that, thinking that maybe we would just continue to do the service part.
So once again, this is your thread showing up. Nothing was lost in that week, right? You found direction in it, and he learned all these things, which are now kind of a framework which he can apply as he's talking to customers and people and members.
Absolutely. Yep. Wasn't lost.
Good. So good. Well, I'm happy you made that decision. I'm sure lots of quilters are, because there's lots of people that can quilt quilts, but what you're offering is a particular and special sort of encouragement and service to business-like quilters all over the world. So we sure appreciate it, speaking as a member myself. So, gosh, we could talk forever, Jess. Like, I just have about 10 more questions jotted down here. We might have to do this again next year. So, but I think for today, we're going to wind it up. Yeah, we've been talking for quite a while. It's been really fun. But I do want to ask before we go, do you have some little tidbit that you'd like to share with our listeners? Something that has been an aha moment for you, or maybe a special opportunity that your craft has opened for you that you'd like to share with us?
We kind of hit on it, but what I came into the conversation wanting to say at the end was I didn't know how to do memberships. I didn't know how to do a course. I had to invest in my own education and learn those skills. And one of the big things that I learned through that process was to take imperfect action. And that is something that I try to repeat a lot to the rookies that come through. That is sort of a through line through the membership content as well. You're so afraid to publish the website. You're afraid to ask for that first client. You're afraid to send that first invoice because you're fearful that it's not perfect or there's going to be something wrong with it. But you learn so much by just jumping in there and trying it. And you can formulate all sorts of scenarios in your mind, but until you actually take the steps, take imperfect action, that's where the real learning and the real lessons kind of show themselves. And so whether it's just trying a new quilting technique or starting that business or any number of things, take imperfect action and you're going to learn so much.
I could not agree more. Well, thank you so very much. This has been just great fun. Appreciate it.
Thanks for asking me, Susan. It's been a lot of fun and I'd love to come back sometime.
And thank you, listener, for tuning into the show. All of the topics that Jess and I talked about today, much information can be found on her websites and hashtags that are linked to her business. So I will post all those connection points in the show notes. So head there if you want to get connected with Jess or the Longarm League. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcast or whatever the app of your choice is. It really helps other listeners to find this show so they can hear the quilting stories too and be encouraged. I'd also love to hear from listeners who'd like to nominate a crafter who has a story to tell. So reach out to me via email, info@stitchedbysusan.com, and don't forget to CC the person that you're nominating as well. So until next time, may your sorrows be patched and your joys be quilted.